Welcome, everyone. I am so glad you guys are here today. My name is Joshua Granberg. I'm a professional portrait painter and a design specialist for Kairos. I'm excited about this lesson because as an artist, the question we're going to explore today is very close to my heart. And that question is this: why is design so important for the church today? If you and your church do the things that we're going to talk about in the next few lessons, then you will attract new people to your church and awaken the fire within your members. You'll learn how to communicate a 2,000-year-old message, the message of Jesus Christ, to a new audience, an audience that thinks they already know it all, an audience that's not interested, at least on the surface, in what you have to offer. But with art and design, you can break through that barrier and communicate the most important message that there is in an attractive, refreshing way. I think it's fair to say that throughout history, the church has had a bit of a love-hate relationship with art and design. Interestingly, that view of art and design seems to shift every time there's a big shift in the way humanity sees the world. We call these shifts a worldview shift. The first century church didn't like all art all that much. It was just way too closely connected to the high Roman art of that time. Then in the Byzantine and medieval eras, art and design became the main vehicles of education for the church. That's what the illuminated manuscripts, even the architecture, was all about. You know, all those statues and paintings in cathedrals? Those were there so that when kids were walking along, they could look up and ask, "Hey Dad, why are those statues there?" And the parents could then tell their kids the story of Jesus using the visual cues of the statues as a reminder. And then in the modern era, we moved back over to that hate side of the relationship because art was all about emotion, and emotion is bad and inferior to reason and intellect. And unfortunately, that's the mindset that most of our churches are coming out of today. But I'm sure you're aware that the world is a very different place now. So why is design so important to the church today? I think there's three main reasons. The first is that good design can speak to people who aren't listening. Have you ever wondered why there's so much change in our world today? There's a new iPhone every 6 months. Every time you log on to your bank's website, it looks different. You're greeted by a different wall of attractive goodies every time you walk into the grocery store. That's because change makes you pay attention. We're creatures of habit, and without a little bit of change, you would never notice the clothing line or the new service that your bank is offering. By changing and refreshing your church's design, you cause your members and guests to hear your message in a new and engaging way. Both members and guests assume they know what you're going to say, sometimes even down to the rise and fall of your voice. When your presentation becomes that predictable, it becomes ineffective. Your people end up responding more to the formula of the service rather than the message itself. Not too long ago, a friend of mine was visiting me from out of town. He had grown up in the Churches of Christ and even went to a Christian university. While he was visiting, we went to my church, which is actually considered fairly progressive for the area. And the entire service, he was squirming in his seat and muttering under his breath, obviously very uncomfortable. After church, I asked him what was going on, and he absolutely went off on how the service was so old and stuffy and just wrong in every way. So I asked him what exactly was said that he disagreed with. And after thinking about it a bit, he reluctantly said, "Well, I think I actually agreed with pretty much everything that was said, and the songs were okay, I guess, but it just felt really bad, and it was so predictable and old." You see, it was the design of the service that he was so offended by. It was the format, the one song, the prayer, the two songs, the announcements, the sermon, etc. And he even admitted that there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but the format, the design, got in the way of the message. The difficulty is we're communicating an old message to a new audience, but the audience is not interested, maybe even resistant. And it takes intentional design to break that barrier. As was the case with my friend, the design of the message can impact the emotions and soul of a person more easily than the spoken word can. But by intentionally designing every aspect of the encounter with your message, you can help your members and guests leave with a positive impact on their life. Good design can help you speak to an audience that's not listening. That brings us to the second reason it's important to have good design in our churches. Have you ever thought about how you remember things? I'm talking about how the brain actually wires new information into itself. Do you know why some people say that they're visual learners and other people auditory learners? It's because we learn new information through our senses. It's even more complicated than that. That information from our five senses has to travel through three different levels of mental processing. It goes from emotion to social and then finally to intellectual. And it has to do it in that order. The point is, none of that complicated stuff can even begin to happen without sight or sound. Remember the phrase that you are what you eat? Well, you can also say that your memories are what you sense. What people see and hear and even smell when they walk into your church is the information they'll use to determine if your church is right for them. That's some pretty serious stuff. There's even more to it than that. It's actually easier for the mind to associate new information with visual cues than in what we hear. All the great memory champions, and yes, that is a thing, a memory champion, they're people like Kevin Horsley and Dominic O'Brien, Harry Lorraine. They use visual cues to help them in their incredible memory feats. You've probably heard of Sherlock Holmes's memory palace. Well, that's an example of the power of visuals in memory. By intentionally designing the visual cues that you use to communicate the gospel, from your website to your preaching slides and the way that your stage is planned out and used, all of these communicate your message in ways that your members and guests can't help but remember, and remember in positive, powerful, life-changing ways. That brings us to the final reason it's important for our churches to use powerful design. And that's because good design matters to God. Now, let's face it, God is the ultimate designer. At the end of each of his creative endeavors, God said, "That's good." Not, "That was all right. Not too bad. Could have done better." No, he said, "That's good." Adam Lancaster, creative manager and associate director of global missions at the Village Church in Texas, says this: "Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is not satisfied with a mundane existence, but leads his sheep to the greenest, most delectable pastures." Proper use of art and design in the life of a Christian and in the church can be that vehicle that plunges them headlong into deep, reflective, God-glorifying worship. Art and design matter to the Christian and to the church because it matters to God, who sees fit to tell of his goodness, not by scratching the surface, but by plumbing the depths of existence. Good, powerful art and design are necessary to the church today because it helps you communicate to those that aren't listening. It helps us remember the good news of Jesus Christ, and because it's important to God, the creator of the universe. So here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to pull up these three pieces of content. First is your church's website, and then your church bulletin, or whatever that main avenue of communication is that you use, whether that's an email or a church app. So pull up your bulletin, and then also pull up an image of your stage, that platform that you present the gospel from. If you don't have an actual photograph, pull it up in your mind, or go out there and sit and look at it. So pull up your website, your church bulletin, and your stage. Then I want you to ask these three questions. First, are these three pieces of content good? Are they visually attractive? Can you look at them and say, "This is good"? And then in just 2 or 3 words, what's that first emotion that you get? What are these pieces of content communicating? Just write those down real quick. What's that first gut reaction? And then, who's the person or group of people that can change these designs? And now, I want you to go actually talk to them and figure out how you together can improve the quality of these three pieces of design. As you're doing this, I want you to pay attention to how your design makes you feel. Do you feel really good about how your church is visually presenting the gospel? Or maybe you feel a bit defensive or resistant. Maybe it just seems like way too much work. Whatever that emotion is, ask yourself why you feel that way. Talk with God about it for a little while. And then go ahead and tell everyone else what you're thinking, what you're feeling as you go through this design module. And comment on other people's posts as well. The more we get people talking, the better this will be. Then also remember this, we live in a world in need of a Savior. So let's design new and creative ways of communicating the gospel of Jesus.